then it's a little bit easier to start letting some of that stuff come out and discuss it and talk about it. And it may be good just to talk about the fact that it's difficult to talk about.
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to a Pondering Life episode of the Share.care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it is in your own interest to help others. And today, it is my great pleasure to have back on the show William Bill Allen, who has a BA in psychology, is a certified hypnotist, and has an advanced certificate in neural optimal brain training. And I'm excited to hear more about that. William is also the author of Confessions of a Sensitive Man and another book called On Being a Sensitive Man. William, it's great to catch up with you again. We are having a nice little chat in the pre-show, but wonderful to have you on the show again.
Hey, David, I'm glad to be back. It was a lot of fun last time we talked, and I know it's going to be good today too.
It is. So, well, I'm excited because in the pre-show we were talking about you're from what I hear now a movie star. Is that right?
Well, I don't know yet. I'll tell you in maybe 3 or 4 months. But yes, we're right now. Will Harper, who is the director of a film called Sensitive Men Rising. It is a movie, the first and only movie that I'm aware of that is exclusively about highly sensitive men. And he's already done several sensitive movies, including the first one, which was called Sensitive: The Untold Story. And that had Alanis Morissette in it and had a few other, a lot of researchers and stuff. Lane Aaron was in it as well. And it kind of kicked the ball off in terms of helping to get more exposure to this personality trait of high sensitivity. So we're hoping last minute we had a last minute change. We got Peter Coyote, the famous American actor, is going to do the voiceover for this, which we're really excited about. And so that took a little bit of time to work that in. And they're still working on finishing it up. And hopefully by mid-July, we're hoping on a premiere in San Francisco. And then the distribution will go wherever they can release streaming, or maybe they'll even do it on a website where you can download it from there. I'm not sure at this point, but I'm real excited about it because it finally is going to tell the story about what sensitivity is in men. And for a lot of men out there that hear that term sensitivity, it's probably not going to be what you think.
Well, that's where, from that perspective, do you want to step back before we get into that sensitivity? How did you get involved with the movie? Did your agent, call and it was shopping around, or were you negotiating on price? How did all that happen?
Yeah. Well, I actually know it was kind of serendipity. It's a very close community of people that work in the sort of high sensitive space. And it's expanding, it's growing all the time, and it's getting bigger. But I got sort of a serendipitous meeting with one of the producers of the first movie, and she introduced me to Will. And Tracy Cooper, who is also the producer of this film, is also a leading researcher, writer, proponent for highly sensitive men, is also involved. And I knew Tracy as well. So we had some discussions about it, and I must admit I kind of pushed to see if I could find a way to get into it. And they were very gracious about letting me do an interview, and just recently, as I was telling you in the pre-show, a couple of
Yeah.
months ago, I went up to St. Louis and had an interview with Tracy Cooper. So that is really, to me, it's sort of like the highlight of what I've been doing and working with highly sensitive men and working with that topic. And it's really an honor to be even asked to be in this movie, but I'm really grateful that I had a chance to.
So what's the movie title? And it's coming out in July.
Yeah, the title is called Sensitive Men Rising. And it's an idea. One of the central themes, I think, of the movie is the idea that this is the time for highly sensitive men to really
Mm.
shine. We're in kind of a very turbulent time in the world's history. Lots going on. Lots of
Mm.
thoughts about masculinity. And redefining, remaking, relooking at, re-examining masculinity, and the idea that highly sensitive men could be a part of that in terms of
Mm.
helping define what a new masculinity might look like. As I said, and we can certainly talk about this more, is the idea of sensitivity is not what most men think of when they think of sensitivity.
Mm.
One of the things the movie is going to really focus on is elaborating on what sensitivity includes. And it's not just sort of this, what most people think, and when they think of sensitivity in men, is a weakness, a frailty, milk
Mm.
toast, sort of like a wilted flower kind of thing. That's not at all what highly sensitive men is about, and it's not are about anyway. And you're going to meet some guys in this movie that shatter the sort of stereotype of what people think of sensitive men.
Yeah, and I want to explore that because since we had our first discussion, you triggered my reticular activating system. It's like when you buy a new car and you started to notice that car everywhere and it was always there. That same thing in the conversations that I've been having, I've noticed a lot more about the sensitivity side of things than I had been previously aware of, even though it was always there in front of me. And I was wondering from that perspective, when we talk about, because it seems to me from now that I'm aware of it, that actually all men are very sensitive. I know we were talking in the pre-show about the distinguish between sensitivity and high sensitivity. But from what I've started to notice is that all men are sensitive. They have a sensitivity. They have emotions, and it seems to be. And we use that analogy, or I use the analogy in the pre-show of like an elephant that when it's a baby, it's staked down, and when it's older it could actually, well, not physically staked down, but staked to a rope, and it could and it can't pull it out because it's not strong enough. But as it gets stronger, it's already learnt that it can't do that, so it doesn't even try anymore. And then when an elephant like that, and an older one, actually breaks free, all of a sudden it actually runs wild because it doesn't understand that capacity to go around, and oftentimes it's actually got to be put down because or sent out to the wild or something. But I've heard of cases where it has to be put down because it becomes uncontrollable because it didn't learn how to deal with this freedom. And I was wondering, thinking of that, given that, the awareness that you brought to me, thank you. I feel like, Obi-Wan, all of a sudden the force has awakened. But is it a case where, before we get into the highly sensitive component, that there is this capacity always inside men, and because it has been repressed so much early on, that when they get an inkling of that, all of a sudden it becomes, holy crap, how do I deal with this? And it gets pushed back down again. Is that something that you're aware of existing, or is it just something that I'm imagining?
No, I think you're right about that. And it's an unfortunate reality. It's like when you were talking, I just had this thought when you were talking about the elephant. This is why we say elephants have long memories, right? Because they carry this memory from their childhood, if you will, to adulthood. But you're absolutely right. Let me back up a second and let's define a couple of terms so that when we're talking, that you and I are talking on the same page.
Yep.
Sensitivity is something that everybody has a degree of or another, right?
Mm.
When I speak of sensitivity, I don't mean sensitive to criticism, sensitive to sort of an all emotional level.
Yeah.
Sensitivity is really about an awareness of what is happening in the environment around you. Okay, just
Mm.
imagine sort of your field of vision, if you will, for what's going on around you, and it's an awareness of that environment that makes people either highly sensitive or less sensitive. Okay,
Mm.
so what happens is, as the environment changes, and it could be anything, it could be an
Mm.
emotional thing that happens, it could be a physical thing that happens, it could be too hot, too cold, bad vibes from people that are you're around, all that kind of thing.
Mm.
Highly sensitive folks are typically more aware of that, and we're still trying to figure out, at least I'm still trying to figure out what the mechanics are for that in the brain. But the idea is that they're more aware of what's going on, and they react to that awareness. Okay,
Mm.
that's what makes them highly sensitive.
Yeah.
Um, People who, and all people have sensitivity. Like I said, it's a spectrum. If you think of like a bell-shaped curve, those people on, let's say, the right-hand side, the higher end side of the thing is it would be higher sensitive, and the people on the lower side would be less sensitive to the other side.
Mm.
And there's no value there. I'm not assigning a good or bad value to it.
Yeah.
But the idea is those people that are less impacted by um, the changes in the environment or things that they can sense around them about them um, are people that would be less impacted by environmental changes. Okay, so
Mm.
it would be less emotional. They would be less impacted to criticism or to what people say. They're kind of like what we used to call in psychology Bobo dolls. You hit them and they bounce right back up, and you just hit them and they bounce right back up. And that's kind of the way their brains are wired.
Mm.
And there's value in that. And I always like to think there's value in it because they're usually the ones that are the risk takers. They're the ones who push society forward because they're willing to take risk. They're less thoughtful about the consequences of the risk, but that allows him to step out and do riskier things. Okay.
Mm.
High sensitive side people are much more cautious, thoughtful, aware because they know, because of their awareness of what changes are in the environment, that it's riskier and that it
Yeah.
might be something that needs to be pondered and thought about. So they're less likely to take huge risks, where those people that
Mm.
other end. So everybody in between has got some degree of sensitivity, awareness of what's going on in the environment. So that's
Mm.
one, that's sensitivity. The other thing that you were mentioning is about all these men suddenly starting to understand that, these emotions that they have been taught, and most of us who have grown up in Western culture, and frankly, I think it's almost universal because of the way the world works today. We have communication and we're exchanging cultural items back and forth between countries. The
Yeah.
idea is that the ideal for masculinity is that the man is stoic, he's logical, and having emotion is something that would color or affect or impact his ability to be that stoic, logical thinking person. So we have taught kids, especially our young boys and even into babies, that expressing emotion is not a good thing. And
Mm.
they need to suppress that. So, you can hear the father say to the little boy, stop crying. You're looking like a little girl now, that kind of thing. And that stuff gets embedded,
Mm.
and carries forward throughout life.
Yeah.
So you've got this idea that there's kind of an awakening, as you're saying, of men starting to realize, well, maybe it would be good for me to be able to express some of these emotions. And the
Mm.
health and the science and the research is all saying that. It's all saying that one of the leading causes of indirect causes, shall we say, of death in men, and probably early death, is this inability to be able to ask for help, or this inability to be able to express these deep-seated emotions that need to come out. And if you suppress and repress emotions long enough, they will find a way to come out. It's usually not very pretty.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point that you're talking about there, and something I'd like to explore from that perspective. Because, as you say, we do all have these emotions, and we've got the highly sensitive category, which you're talking about. But even outside of that, unless you're a complete psychopath, and sometimes it might be nice to be able to get in touch with. There's times when I'm dealing with some people, I'm like, I wish I could deal with that without having to worry about the emotion attached to it.
Yeah.
Let's put that aside and my facetiousness aside as well. But from that perspective, we've got to have a bit of a laugh.
Absolutely.
From that side of things, though, but what you're talking about there is we all have emotions, and if we don't address that, it builds up and it builds up, and it's almost like using a cancer as an example. It builds up inside until it becomes really detrimental. But for guys, and I'm wondering about this, I've had a number of discussions on that topic where when you talk about guys being angry and violent and aggressive, from what I understand now is a lot of research out there is that relates to a lot of it relates to depression and this frustration of not being able to do that, and because again putting that in that context of that elephant, when they break free, on the ones that have broken free, all of a sudden it becomes that out of control because they have no idea, they haven't been taught the stages going through how to deal with that. And that's why I was wondering from that perspective of, okay, we've got this repression of emotions saying shouldn't have it, but you got to have it. It's there. It's biological. It's not, you can't take it away. How do we, from that perspective, is it a case, how do we, I'm just wondering about that. Is it a case where we just need to have more of, I think I referenced last time, Crocodile Dundee, where, they're talking about psychiatry and it says, we don't have a psychiatrist at Walkabout Creek. If we have a problem, we tell Wally, Wally tells everybody else, and there's no more problem.
Yeah.
Is it as simple as that, where we can just have more conversations, go, hey, this is what it is to be human?
Absolutely. I think that's really important. One of the things too that a lot of men don't do is, when men get together, if you think about this, a lot of the conversation is transactional. I do something for you, you do something for me, that kind of thing. Or it's very often very superficial. If you get a bunch of guys around drinking beer and talking, whatever, the last thing probably any one of the men want to do is step up and say, look, my wife just left me and I feel this way and that way and so forth, and lay it out on the table. And so what happens instead is they don't talk about it. They don't talk about a group of men. And this is something that I think is starting to happen. It may be in small pockets where men are starting to gather again and they're starting to talk about things that matter to them. And they're starting to realize, and I encourage, whether you're sensitive or not, I mean, I kind of work with a highly sensitive men's group, which is actually meeting this week. And guys from all over the world, we all get together and we talk about whatever's on our mind, whatever's emotional to us, or whether it's just something we're trying to deal with. And I think more men need to be able to do that. Once they realize I'm not the only one that feels this way, then it's a little bit easier to start letting some of that stuff come out and discuss it and talk about it. And it may be good just to talk about the fact that it's difficult to talk about. It's that could be in and of itself therapeutic by itself, is to be able to say, I have a really hard time expressing these feelings. I have a really hard time expressing emotion. And having the encouragement of other men as they're there, that will, I think, help sort of facilitate some of these men being able to let some of this out. And you're absolutely right. Human emotion is a natural thing. It's part of what makes us what we are. It drives behavior. And those behaviors are the things that keep us alive. So taking any group of those emotions for any length of time and suppressing them, even the ones that aren't what you might call the dark emotions, the ones that need help, that need some work, needs to have somebody to work with you to help you work through some of those things. For example, like the emotions associated with PTSD, then you really want to have a way of getting that emotion out, because the emotion can fester, and as you said, it can very often by the studies, what the studies are showing is a lot of this emotions, this anger, winds up becoming violent after a while, and it gets released somehow, some way, and it may be through drinking too much or taking some substance or whatever. That emotion is going to find a way to creep out. So the idea is that we really do need to encourage men to start talking about and feeling some of these emotions at a pace I think that would be comfortable for them, but they still need to start making that headway.
Is it a case too, because in the discussions that I've had, and from my experience as well, when I was the CEO of the Family Peace Foundation, we did a recording. The founder and his wife, they offered up their house at this large mansion here in Melbourne, and what we did was we wanted to film and get little snippets of information that would help people. And we had two prominent psychologists here. We had Dr. Michael Carr-Gregg and Sabina Reid. We were very prominent in Australia on they're like the Dr. Phil's type thing in this space.
Okay.
Although they don't have their own, well, they do kind of have their, anyway, they're well known. And so we had them there asking questions. We had a dinner table set up, so it was like a dinner party, and we actually had people serving, and this was all set up. And we wanted to make it a little bit classy, but we brought people in that we knew were from strong families, that they had good, we are of the understanding they had good ability to manage emotions and deal with things. And anyway, I was directing it, and we had more people there than we had for table space. So we were rotating people in and out. We had men and women. But I noticed, because I come from a corporate background where sometimes you get the discussion of men dominate the conversation and women don't get to speak, I noticed as we were filming, all of a sudden the men are starting to do all the talking. And I was getting worried about that. So I said to the women off camera, I went up to them and said, look, I'm getting worried. It seems like the men are doing dominating the conversation because they're doing all the talking. And the women turned to me and said, no. We've never heard men talk about this stuff. We're loving listening. And from that, discussions and things like that, I've had people come and say to me, it's very easy to shut men down. A look can shut men down. So they might go to talk and shut down. Is it a combination? Because I look at it and go, well, if I've got something to say, I'll be cautious about how I say it, maybe, but I will say what I need to say. And is it a combination of both, where we need to be having safe spaces for people to talk, but also to be encouraging men, not put it on everybody else and say, oh, you should let me talk, and that's why I haven't, because that's kind of blaming other people. But we should be encouraging guys to get that courage as well to say, hey, this is important to me.
Yeah, I as you were talking about this, one of the things that kept kind of popping into my head was this notion of vulnerability. That's another thing that men are taught not to be, is vulnerable. And when you are expressing emotions, especially those kind of emotions that are tearful, where you're, physically crying or upset, you're really showing some vulnerability when you do that. And for a lot of men, that's very uncomfortable. If you notice, you probably have seen this on Australian TV or any kind of TV from around the world, where they're interviewing people who've been through some crisis, like a natural disaster or something. And they might get a guy, and he just lost his house, his home, everything he's worked for. And he's sitting there interviewing him. They always ask that stupid question, well, how do you feel now? And the idea is that the emotion just overcomes that individual. And the tears start to come up. But the first reaction to that very often is to fight back, right? Is to not show, is not to break down and cry. Whereas you might have women on there who are much more comfortable expressing their feelings because they've been encouraged to do so throughout their lives, would more than likely go ahead and just cry and let that work into the conversation. Now, I'm not saying women wouldn't stop and continue the conversation, but for men, that's that vulnerability, letting themselves be exposed. And that is very hard for a lot of guys. And sometimes I think that prevents them from really digging deep into how they're feeling, because they don't want to seem to be too vulnerable. And because you can think of all that chatter that's going on in the back of your head as a man, the things you've been told since childhood, don't show your weakness, don't show
Mm,
emotion, don't show them you're being vulnerable.
yeah.
And that's what that's the kind of that dialogue we talk about the elephant, remembering that he
Mm,
could not pull up the stake
yeah.
because he had been conditioned to believe he couldn't do it, even though he had the power to do it. And that's the same thing it is with men at an older age that could certainly deal with the emotions a little more in a more mature way, still is carrying around that stake in the ground and the chain, and will not let themselves come completely become open and vulnerable.
But that vulnerability, as you're talking about, is it to be able to be vulnerable is a courageous thing to do,
It is.
especially in the face of, if you're vulnerable and someone starts to take advantage of that, then having the courage to say, hey, know where that boundary is that where we need to be, again, encouraging guys, you can say this, and if be aware that, yeah, not everyone's going to accept that, or someone might even take advantage of that, but you need to be aware of, go, okay, I need to, work out where that safe space is. I need to be able to express this because I need to express it. And I'm looking at that from my own life, where there's times where I've lost it, and, well, when I say lost it, I've broken down and cried, sort of thing. But and with friends that understood that, and let that out, because, again, that whole thing of it building up doesn't work very well. But also, too, in going through that process, I'm able to deal with those situations much more effective now. I can, when I notice that, I can actually address it so it doesn't build up and become this a big explosion. It's dealt with very early.
Yeah, it's a learning process, because what you
Mm,
have to learn to do, especially as you get older, is uh, you want to not be able to, or have to repress emotions that you're feeling, especially when
mm,
they really need to come out. Okay,
yeah.
and sometimes they want to come out at times it may not seem to be appropriate. You're in a crowd of people, strangers, they don't know you, and suddenly you get a phone call, somebody passes away, and you're overcome with emotion. You start crying and whatever. Those
Mm,
are kind of that spontaneous allowance for those kind of extreme waves of emotion that you have. The other
mm,
thing that I think men need to do, and still using the elephant analogy here, is
mm,
that um, the elephant in his brain is probably experiencing kind of a fire hose moment where he's got this emotion of being free and being able to do what he wants to do. It sort of short circuits parts of his brain. And it's like this fire hose beating around, and it's driving him crazy. The same
mm,
thing is true if you're not used to releasing emotion. Um, and one of the key things to do, and this is something I encourage people to work with a therapist or somebody who's skilled at doing this. And I'm not a psychologist, so I want to
mm,
make sure people understand that. But the idea is that learning to regulate emotion is not the same thing as suppressing or repressing emotion.
yeah,
It's now taking that fire hose and learning how to use it for the good, for your
yeah,
good, and releasing it at appropriate times and so forth and so on. And I think that's a thing that men would be much more comfortable with if
mm,
they felt, okay, you know, I don't have to turn into a complete emotional wreck, but what I can do is I can learn to release emotions in an appropriate way, in a way
mm,
that allows them to come through, but also learn to regulate at times when it may not be appropriate for me to be, completely breaking down or whatever, and so forth. And so it's a kind of a walk, a tightrope walk, but it's
mm.
one well worth doing because of the idea that it's allowing you to be a complete and fulfilled human being, because you're accounting for and allowing those emotions.
Yeah. So from that perspective, as you say, you're a complete person. You've got these emotions. Now, they're going to vary. Sometimes, if you're walking down the street and step on an ant, you're probably not going to get too emotional about that. But it's, you've taken a life technically. so it's one of those things where it's a matter of perspective. Other times, as you say, because I had that experience recently. My dad had an injury, and I was looking at him, and it affected the way he walked. I mean, he's recovering, but that put into context his mortality for me.
Right.
He's 75, so I'm looking, going, okay, yeah, he's he's getting up there. he's
Yeah.
not going to be around forever. So I started to think about what that might be like, and so it was like, okay. And in a way, I was kind of preparing myself for when that does happen, how I would go through that experience. And I was thinking about those things. I was noticing those feelings and adjusting to that. Is that the kind of thing from, when you're talking about that, how we can, be aware of that range of emotion that we could have, and then work out how do we process that? How do we deal with that? Is it a case of having the skills to do that, or is it something? Because I think where I'm heading with that is, I think some men probably think that having emotions means you're out of control, which I don't. From my experience, that's not the case. It's just there's ways of addressing things.
Well, yeah, and there's probably a lot of ways, Damien, that they're looking at that as well. It's, as I said, the conditioning also accounts for how they see themselves as men,
Mm,
the masculinity part of it, and uh, unbridled emotion is sort of the antithesis of what we expect from men, and
mm,
so there is that kind of conflict inside that says I can't release it, even though I feel it, even though I know I should, I just can't
mm,
do it. You know, there's so and in fact, I'm working on a book now on masculinity. It's just so fascinating to me, the kinds of conditions that men are raised under, the kind of conditions they're expected to be. And I realize there are a lot of people that are saying, well, you know, what's the big deal? Men have been in charge and men have been doing things for years. But the idea is that men have not been allowed by
mm,
society. And that includes women's expectations as well,
mm,
that they're not allowed to be this vulnerable human being that has emotions and feelings, who can be hurt and also can be joyous and can be loving and caring. All these things, this palette of
mm,
emotional colors that we can paint with, but we're not allowed to do that. And
mm,
so as men get older, and I think, like I said, and I think you're acknowledging that as well, is that men are becoming aware of the fact that, because it's anywhere you turn these days, they're talking about men being able to talk about their emotions, and
mm,
groups are doing that all over the world. The idea is that men are being confronted with something that they've never been able to do before. Plan A has always been just suppress the emotion and tough it out and
yeah.
go on. And now you're saying I can feel things, and what am I going to do with that?
Yeah.
And so I think that's really kind of where a lot of men are stuck right now. They're kind of in that dilemma of, okay, now I'm acknowledging I have emotions. Now what do I do with it? And they don't have the training or the sort of operational memory to remember how to handle different types of emotions, because in the past they've just sort of suppressed them.
Mm. And it's interesting what you mentioned there, and the reference to men as well, because what I've found really encouraging out of these conversations that I've had with a lot of people, when I've had with both men and women, um, I've, all of the women that I've had the discussions with have been on that category of, we need to be encouraging men. Women have had the run for the past 80 odd years where they had all this empowerment, development, that kind of thing, which is good, and we needed to do that. But it's been fascinating for me how many women have come up and said, actually, I'm here to empower men. I'm here to help them, which is really, I'm meeting. There's a lady in Queensland I'm meeting with next week, and we're catching up. And her sole focus is, I'm here to support men. Women have had the run for such a long time. It's, we need the men to be able to go through this experience, and it's wonderful to have that. Is that something you've noticed as well? That is it's both. I don't like saying both sides, but that's kind of the polarizations out there at the moment. But it seems to be
Yeah.
there's a coming back together now of, we need to work together. Men and women, we're designed to fit together. Otherwise the species doesn't
Absolutely.
move forward.
And we just both happen to be a part of the human race. So,
Yeah.
uh, I you're right. There's been this polarization for millennia about
Mm,
men versus women, men doing this, women do, and as you said, gratefully over the last 60 something years or so, women have been pursuing the women's liberation movement, which has allowed women to step up and allow them to do things that they were not allowed to do before, take their rightful place, and be with men and partner with men,
mm,
and that's great, and it's been wonderful, and I'm very encouraged by what you're saying about this female who's going to do this work with men.
mm,
But what we really need is something to help liberate men, and I think
mm,
one of the things about this is that, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form discouraging any woman to help with this. I kind of think in a lot of ways it would be very helpful if men would help other men.
mm,
Because one of the things I think a lot of men are missing is a father figure element in
mm,
their lives. And not everybody has a close relationship with their dad. I know I didn't. Uh,
mm.
Regrettably, he died when I was 17, so we never did get to patch that up.
Yeah.
But a lot of men feel that way, and their fathers could very well still be alive. It's their father is still living in that role where he's
Mm,
not allowing himself to be close and nurturing to his son.
yeah.
So the emotions he feels about his son are not being communicated to the son. So the son is going through his life without the father's um, obvious shows of affection and love and
Mm,
that kind of communication. And that's something that men miss. What has happened too is that
yeah.
men have been on the forefront in a lot of ways of policing the old code, which says you can't be emotional and so forth. So a
Yes.
lot of times men are caught in this thing where the men are bashing other men for being emotional. And
Mm.
so it's kind of a catch-22 for a lot of guys, especially when you say, well, let's get together with a bunch of guys and talk about this. It's like, well, hell no, I don't want to do that because they're just going to bash me.
It's
So
in
getting men to encouraging men to be a part of this and to fill in some of those things that I think men are missing
mm.
could be a part of a men's liberation movement. And we're not talking about taking anything away from women. We're talking
Burning our
about
underwear.
allowing, yeah, we're talking about allowing men to be human beings,
Yeah.
to more free to express themselves emotionally and otherwise, as humans would do.
It's an interesting point that you talk about it, and I'm very lucky in that regard. I mean, I didn't always have a great relationship with my dad growing up, and then certainly we had issues in our family, and things like that. And I would say we fit that in a way. Many areas fit that stereotypical tough man role. I mean, and we had to. I mean, when I look at um, my grandparents, for example, my granddad. He escaped from. He was in Polish. I'm Polish, Russian, and Ukraine, and I'm integrated, so I should be over there. I think I can, do that. But my grandfather was Polish, partly Russian, and when the Nazis invaded, he joined the Polish. Well, he was part of the military, and then he joined the resistance, and he actually escaped from 2 concentration camps. He was shot
Wow.
twice.
Wow.
So there's a certain, there was a whole bunch of other stuff. My grandmother on the same, and she was, Polish, as a teenager, young teenager, she was grabbed off the streets by Nazis and taken to a camp, a forced labor camp, and God knows what atrocities happened there. So on both sides, and my grandmother was always, ask her how she was. She'd always the same line. I no complain, with an accent.
That's
Um,
it's interesting because I have great respect for all Slavic people because they
mm.
just have this kind of uh, you're not gonna you cannot keep them down. That's the thing that they have got such great attitudes about.
Well, that's
You
what they're
know,
finding now. It's interesting listening to the American military leaders talk about the training of the Ukrainians, and they just surprise you how fast they learn. Maybe that explains why I learned fast. I don't know, but getting to the point of this manly, I said from my perspective, my dad and I we weren't always close. We didn't always talk, and I want to talk about this sensitivity and what that means. We'll get into that in a minute. But what I wanted to expand upon was what you were talking about, men supporting men. Had a wonderful experience because my dad and I, for a long time now, we say, we love you, we hug each other, whenever we see it. We don't talk very often. And so I wanted to get into that, being sensitive in communications. But when we do, we connect. And
Right.
but we said always give each other a hug when we see each other. Say I love you. That happens all the time. And it was fascinating. We're at it wasn't a pub, but it was a club where I was drinking there, and a couple of guys there were with my dad was there, and I went to meet him, and we're having a discussion. And there's a couple of guys there that my dad did an apprenticeship with. So we're talking. My dad's 75. So and this happened in the since we last met, and so they were there and we're all having a conversation. I went to leave, and without thinking about it, I just walked away. Normally I'd give him a hug, but for whatever reason I didn't. I don't know why, but I just walked away. My dad went, "Oi, where's my hug?" He put his arms out like that. So I've come back and given him a hug, and he's one of his apprentice guys. "What are you doing? You can't do that. Can't." And my dad just turned around and said, "I can hug my son if I want to. Back off." And it was just that whole experience. And the guy did. He was just like, "Oh, okay." And it was just one of those things. But as you're saying, men supporting men, is it a case of we just need to be doing more of that to say, hey, this is okay? Again, that Wally thing, just talk about it.
Perfect. It's a perfect example of somebody, especially your dad being the older man there.
Yeah, the older bull.
Modeling for other men the kind of things that men can do. And that is the nurturing part. That is the soft part. I didn't come up with a family who were big huggers, but I taught all of my kids to hug, right? And I because I felt it was very important to have the touch, the contact with people. But your dad did a great job. They did a great thing for that person because he was seeing it being modeled.
Yeah.
And it was making a connection in that guy's brain at some level that it's okay to do this.
And that's where I was coming back to from that side of things, because a lot of people I've talked to on one side have said, and coming back to that experience where we had that safe space where the men started talking about things like that. But the same token too, I do wonder about, and maybe it's just, my grandfather, my dad says I'm a lot like my grandfather. He was strong, but he was also, he had that balance. My dad said when he was growing up, it was always do what your mum says. My grandfather didn't go to church. I mean, Polish, very Catholic. My grandmother went to church, and as a result, the kids went. But my grandfather, I think he went to church for 2 funerals and a wedding once. Outside of that, he didn't go. But he was like, do what your mum says. And so they all went to church growing up. But he was also this tough old guy that could get things done. And that's what I was wondering from that perspective. Is it we need to have that step up as well as guys and go, hang on a minute, I am sensitive, but I need to be able to, when that moment comes, like when my dad had that, it's like I need to step up and actually say, hey, this is okay.
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of this is just like what we're doing now, discussion about sensitivity. What does it mean? What does it really mean to be sensitive? You can be, in fact, I have a really good friend who is probably, if you looked up adventure-seeking person, he would be the picture.
He's in the dictionary.
Yeah, he's in the dictionary. But the idea is that he is also a sensitive man. So this notion, it's funny, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this television show. It's an American classic, but I don't know if it got distributed around the world, but it was the Andy Griffith Show.
Yeah, I know of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the characters in the Andy Griffith Show was this deputy that they had. Andy Griffith was a sheriff. He was calm, collected. He's the epitome of the guy that's got it all together, knows the right thing to say, do, and everything else, isn't usually emotionally affected by stuff. And then there's his sidekick deputy, who is kind of a very high-strung, highly emotional, 90-pound weakling kind of guy. milk toast, that's what people think of when they think of sensitivity, is
Mm.
this Barney Fife character. And that's not what sensitivity is.
Yeah.
Can there be sensitive people that act like him? Sure. But there are probably a lot of things that went into this Barney Fife's character that were above and beyond the sensitive traits that he might have had.
Yeah.
So one of the things I have to try to do, and I continue to try to do on, when I go on podcasts or when I talk to people, is try to help them understand that sensitivity is not just about what we see as a weakness or frailty, and especially with men, because men
Mm.
look at it, they go, no way am I sensitive, right? I am not like Barney Fife. I am not that way at all.
Yeah.
But the fact is, you may not want to show some of the aspects of sensitivity and whatever, but you still may be sensitive. And guess what? You can still be a man. You can still do all the things that men do. Like my friend who travels around the world, does adventures, and I mean
Mm.
life-threatening sometimes kinds of adventures. And he's the most decent, down-to-earth, wonderful, caring person you'll ever meet in life. But if you looked at him, right, he looks like he just got out of Mad Max or something. He's a tough-looking guy, but
Yeah.
underneath he's got that, and it's sort of that classic. He was tough as nails, but he was an old softy inside. That's
Mm.
kind of what it sounds like your grandfather might have been.
Well, is that the case? Because let's explore the sensitivity, because I think, from my understanding, it covers so many different things. And I'll take it to this extreme where, one of my hats that I wear, I run a private equity fund. It doesn't take a lot of my time because it doesn't need to, and
Right.
and it invests mostly in stocks. And a lot of the time, I will have to choose between two stocks, and fundamentally they're all the same, as in they're both of them the same. There's,
Okay.
this one's got they meets all this criteria, this one meets all this criteria, and often it comes down to a gut decision on my behalf as to which one I'll go with. There's other factors outside of my awareness I'm putting it down to, but I go, okay, that one, and more often than not, that one will perform better. And I put that in that category of, that's what a sensitivity is. It's awareness of, and because you mentioned awareness before, is that where we're heading? It's an awareness of things beyond that. I mean, I put it in the when I was out there dating as well. I
Uh-huh.
would be aware of, which girls kind of were interested, and then,
Yeah.
when they were interested, I was aware of, how far you could go as well. And there would be like, okay, notice, I can go, a little bit further here. But it was, again, I see that as a sensitivity. Is that where
Well,
what we're talking
that's
about?
exactly right, Damon. You got it. You nailed it.
Yeah.
It's an awareness of things. Some of this stuff is information you've observed, and then immediately, I guess, maybe thrown it back into memory somewhere.
Mm.
Um, and that ability to especially to intuit
Mm.
the difference between two equal things, where if you were doing it kind of mathematically, logically, it might not have separated anything between the two stocks.
Mm.
But there was other data that's churning in the back, and you're drawing on that intuitive side, which kind of flies in the face of, well, I just use logic when I make a decision. Everything is inductive or deductive logic or whatever.
Yeah.
When you're using intuition, what you're doing is you're drawing from something else that you already knew from
Mm.
something in the past, and you're using that intuition, that information that's bubbling up from, say, somewhere in the unconscious about which one is better, and that's your gut feeling. And it's
Mm.
not surprising, because all that stuff kind of is tied. The unconscious is kind of very much tied to the body,
Yeah.
the vagus nerve that goes to the gut, and the gut has a certain intelligence and a certain awareness and certain neurology behind it as well. So
Well,
those
some
things
argue
all
that
get
unconscious is actually a body memory. That's the whole of body. It's not
exactly.
just,
And
yeah.
I've become kind of a believer in that myself,
Mm.
um, because so much of you think about it, if you think about like body memory, um,
Mm.
learn to play golf or something like that, and you practice and you practice and you get your swing down and everything's, you get your drive. where you're driving really well because your swing is right, it's not because you're thinking about it. It's
Yes.
because you're going, and the best way to play is play with
Mm.
body members. You get it so it's so trained that you're
Yeah.
not thinking about it anymore. When you don't think about it, then that kind of your body takes over, and it's that sort of subconscious body
Mm.
memory that kicks in. And yes, I totally agree. And I mean to digress that way, but it just
No,
lit
but we
up.
want to, that's the whole point. We're exploring that for the people
Yeah,
listening, going, hey, this is a broader thing, because from what I understand is, I mean, and I know the research is still very early on this, but even from the perspective of, because when you look at it, for example, when, there's certain animals, when there's, let's say a giraffe is born, when that giraffe comes, and compare that to a baby, a human baby,
mhm,
when the difference when they're both born, a giraffe comes out, it can walk, it can eat, it can do everything the adult can do, but a person when they're born can't do that.
right.
And there's certain element which I understand relates to DNA as well, where you can actually have those memories as part of the DNA, and as you learn something, it actually changes your DNA a little bit. And the research is still very early on that, from what I understand. But part of that, when you're connecting that to that sensitivity, it's going, okay, are we listening enough to be able to absorb that information? Is how I'm wondering about that when we're talking about being, a man, being manly. We talked about that on podcast, but we're talking about that sensitivity in men. Is it a case of being able to listen and I use the word absorb the information? Is that where we need to be having those discussions with guys? Is, hey, shut up and listen, but when really listen, as in you don't know everything, maybe just have a thought that maybe you
Yeah.
don't know everything.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's a great segue to this too, because I think that everybody has the capacity to do this kind of observational
Mm,
awareness type thing that goes on with your environment. Um, but the focus and attention is not always there, right? Because it's distracted on something else, or it's focused on
mm,
someplace differently. But I think you can learn to develop that kind of awareness. And you're right. One of the ways of doing that is to listen. Learn how to listen when somebody's talking to you. And when you're in a discussion with somebody, listen to what they're
mm,
saying before you jump ahead and get into your what you've already got planned out and mapped out in your head about what you want to say next.
yeah.
But that observational learning is that part, I think, that feeds the unconscious, that feeds where you're going to draw. It's become like a pool of information that you're going to draw down on at some point in the future. And the more you feed it, the more information that you have. And then being able to trust the intuitive part of you.
Mm,
So that you go on and take the risk and say, look, I'm going to go with this stock B because I don't know, it just has a feeling about it, right?
mm,
Or it strikes me as this is the one I should go with. And there's no logical reason you did that. It's just a gut feeling. Well, that's I think part of the sensitivity aspect is highly sensitive people are extremely observant to begin with. They don't have to teach
mm,
them how to be observant. They already know how to do that. And they
yeah.
observe with a great deal of detail too. And that's why one of the reasons why they get so impacted by the changes in the environment. But
Mm,
that's something that everybody has the capacity to do. And I think everybody could learn that. Other men could learn to be more sensitive, like in that sense that what I call sensitive awareness of the environment around you. And that can inform a lot of the
mm,
other things that sensitivity brings with it as well. And there are a lot of good things. I mean, really good things about that. It could be, and as my friend Randy, the guy I was telling you about, who was a venture-seeking individual, he said on a number of occasions, his sensitivity, his awareness saved his life. You
mm,
know, he was in avalanches. He's been in circumstances where he's been trapped underwater. It's his ability to draw down on that intuitiveness, that observational and situational and sensitive awareness of the environment around you that made him make the right decision about what he did next that saved his life. So, see, so when you hear, this is what gets me about when I hear people talking about sensitivity, they roll their eyes, guys especially do that. And they say, I don't want to be that. Well, why the hell not? Think of it like this. If you were a trail guide, I think I may have used this in the last time we talked, but a trail
Yeah.
guide, if you hire somebody to be a trail guide, you want them to be observational. You want them to be sensitive to what's going
Yeah.
on around you. It could be a matter of life and death for you otherwise. So that's not a bad thing. It's actually quite a good thing, I think.
Well, I mean, is it that case from that perspective that it's more of a power thing, that it actually gives you more power? I look at it, and I'm going to change how I approach this now from this conversation, because I have a program that I work with corporates. It's a negotiation training called Negotiation Magic, and it's high end, very powerful negotiation tool, or tools within that. So many different sources of power, and one of those tools is listening. One of them is asking questions, but also too having, and you mentioned this, we're talking about a sensitive awareness. You mentioned that a couple of times there, and that's really, really powerful. If you're in a discussion, and it can just be a discussion with your child, if you're in that ability to have that sensitivity to, and I do this all the time with my son. I'm aware sometimes he might want to talk, other times he needs space. I'm aware of it and go, okay, if you try and force especially a kid, a teenager, he's 14, if I try and force him to have a conversation when he doesn't want to have one, he's going to run away. He's going to think I'm a prick and, bossy
Right.
dad and all kind of crap. And there'll be other times where I'm talking with him here, he's okay to talking, and then I can sense, his, okay, he's had enough. And I literally say, you've had enough of dad lecturing. And he goes, yep. And
Yeah.
he's got
Yeah.
it. I can tell he's got it. But that gives me, I put it as that gives me tremendous power, because as a son, my son doesn't sit there on his mobile phone. If I ask him to clean the bathroom, he'll go and clean. Sometimes he doesn't, but it needs to be asked a couple of, that's a guy trait. We need to be asked a couple of times. So,
Yeah.
I'm going to put that out there,
Especially for cleaning bathrooms, right?
exactly, but most of the time he'll do it the first time, and other times, where he's, asking him to empty the bins, and he'll do that. There's one time he didn't do it, and he got up the next morning and he found some of the rubbish sitting on his computer. That was my way.
Yeah.
I didn't lecture him on not doing it. It's just like, there it is. What didn't you do last night? And he goes, yeah, all right, I didn't do that. But I mean,
Yeah.
from that sensitivity point of view, is it really, we need to be couching in that frame of, this is an awareness, this is actually power. If you're in a negotiation, using that analogy, you want as much information as possible, because that's going to give you more ability to get what you want, also help the other person get what they want, because if you know what they want, you can help them get that.
Exactly. One of the things that keep in mind as well is that, it's not just about active listening. It's about paying attention to what's going on around you from your other senses, right? So you might be looking at a person and you may be seeing they're fidgeting. Let's say you're in a negotiation or something. They're fidgeting around. They look very uncomfortable. And I'm by no means a master negotiator, but the idea is ideally, I think you want to get a win-win for everybody in a negotiation, that everybody walks away with something.
Well, that's one of the biggest, sorry to digress here, but one of the biggest mistakes people make in negotiation, they think it's about the bottom deal. It's about the ongoing relationship. Because even if you rip someone off, you still have a relationship, because they ain't coming back to you.
That's right. That's right. But the idea is that if it doesn't matter if it's a negotiation and you're in an office conference room or something, big table and all that, or whether you're sitting there at the kitchen table with your son, there are things that he's doing and saying and communicating to you that are, as they say, most of communication between humans is nonverbal. So being aware of those things and being aware of your awareness of those things is what's going to make a difference about, do I push this now or do I back off a little bit? He seems uncomfortable. What's a better tactic and approach, instead of just driving a message across and he has to accept that. You're not taking into consideration his feelings or where he's at, that kind of thing as well. So being aware is also being aware of other sensory bits that are out there that you're taking in, that may not be obvious, right? There may be subtle things that are going on. And to me, that's that sensitive awareness part. That's the part that will be feeding into you that you'll be able to say, I've got a bad feeling about this. Negotiation's not going. I got a bad vibe. I think we ought to stop for today and come back to this or whatever. Trust your gut on that, especially if you're, learning to get involved with your sensitive awareness.
Mm,
And those bits and pieces of information are there for everybody. It's not just highly sensitive people. It's just that highly sensitive people are more tuned into it because it's the way they're wired. But it
mm,
doesn't mean other people can't learn to do that. It's not like there's highly sensitive people that have great uh, ability to discern things from the environment. Other people don't.
mm,
Everybody does have that ability. And I think that's one of the things about highly sensitive people, and in particular, highly sensitive men too,
yeah.
that can do this modeling for other men, so that other men can say, "Oh, that's how you do it. Oh, I see what you did there," and that kind of
Mm.
thing.
Is it a case too? I mean, because when we're talking about awareness, I know from my perspective, there's a self-awareness as well. Because I can push pretty hard, and sometimes, it was a couple of weeks ago. I went. There was 3 days in a row where I had 4 hours sleep. I just had so much stuff on that I was
Right.
pushing and I was going. Well, pushing's not the right word. Maybe it was adrenaline junkie, whatever. Um, but I was happy about it. I didn't have to drive. I didn't have to drive myself to do it. But it was just there was so much in my days at that time that I didn't have much sleep. But then I became aware my body was going, we need a bit of rest here. And my mind was, I'm still going, but I was like, hang on a minute. And then I became, okay. So I stopped. I actually had a couple of days where I just scheduled it slightly differently. So I knew I was going to be up late. I think I was up till 1 or 2 in the morning, but I didn't set my alarm and I didn't have any meetings there. So I slept till, one day I slept till 10:30 in the morning.
Right.
It just went through but I was aware of this is what I needed. Is that part of that discussion as well? It's not just awareness of outside, but it's awareness of what's going on for you internally.
Yeah, absolutely. And um, again, it's a kind of a push pull sometimes.
Mm,
You could be aware of like, for example, that your body needs sleep. And
yeah,
this is, and for highly sensitive people, and we could just get back to that because that's kind of my
yeah,
wheelhouse. But anyway, that highly sensitive people do need to get proper rest. They need to have sort of time to detox and get away from whatever it is that
mm,
business of life that they do, because they need the downtime. It's just part of the way we're wired. But
yeah,
it's true for anybody else. But there's also that push pull about, okay, but I could do a little bit more, or I could push myself a little bit further. And having that internal awareness, as you were speaking of, it says, nope, you got to stop now. And you need
mm,
to go to sleep and you need to get some rest, and then you can get back at it tomorrow or another day. So
mm,
I think that for men, particularly because men are always taught to sort of gut it out and push yourself as hard as you can. If you want to
mm,
get anywhere in life, you've got to push yourself hard, hard, hard like that. Having that sort of sense of self awareness about what is your body telling you? Is it saying
mm,
it's stressed? Because the same problem manifests itself with the, like as I was saying, that the suppressed emotion. Well, this idea of not listening to your body
mm,
can lead to health problems later on. It could be high
yeah,
blood pressure, heart disease. It could be, and maybe even a precursor to cancer. It could be
mm.
psychological issues that are created because you're not listening to what your body's telling you. And that's a very important thing for men to start paying attention to, is this idea when it's time to rest, you need to rest.
Yeah, and that this is coming back to, as you said, this listening, and especially as you say, for highly sensitive men, that they've have that, where they actually have the receptors, or if I want to use that term, I don't know if that's right or not, but they're more receptive to that information. Um, but is it, from that perspective, can it be that simple as just taking that time to listen, just step back and listen?
Well, the big thing now, I think, um, it's been in psychology for the last at least 20, 30 years, but it's
Mm,
this idea of mindfulness.
yeah.
And we do so many things. I learned this very quickly in hypnosis, that a lot of behaviors that people do, for example, I used to work with people who were wanting to quit smoking cigarettes.
Mm.
And I was a smoker at one time. And I know that almost, I don't know, half, three quarters of the cigarettes that I smoked were done almost unconsciously. I would
Yep.
smoke and wouldn't even realize I had a cigarette.
Yep.
And those are the kind of behaviors where you suddenly are not aware of what you're doing to your body, with your body. The
Mm.
same thing could be true for people who eat sort of mindlessly. You know, they sit there and they just eat. When they get nervous, they eat. They put something in their mouth because it's comfort and it's
Me and
whatever, and they're
chocolate.
not thinking. Yeah, they're not mindful of what they're doing. That's become a thing now.
Mm.
The idea that everywhere you go, you can read, what do I do to correct this psychological issue? Well, one of the things invariably in that list is mindfulness. So
Mm.
it's basically teaching yourself to pay attention to the things that you should naturally pay attention to. You
Yeah.
never hear about indigenous people worried about, overeating or doing things like that because they are more in
The
tune
food ran
with
fast.
their
That's why
bodies.
they
Yeah,
had to catch it.
yeah, exactly. There's a price to pay if you don't get that, right? But the idea is they're more in tune with things around them. They're more in tune with their environment. They're more in tune
Mm.
with their bodies.
Mm.
And where food is so easy to get, and sort of Western civilization, that we take it for granted that we can just stuff our faces as much as we want. And that,
Yeah.
sort of voids out the whole idea of being mindful of what you're doing. So, the idea about being aware of your body, paying
Mm.
attention to that is a process, and it's a learned process at that. But it's something that can be done. It's not something that's insurmountable. It's not going
Have,
to take you that long to learn how to do that.
yeah. Have we taken it like, is that where we've got really made it difficult for ourselves by, because I talk a lot about life is easy, and people go, oh, you have to work hard to succeed and things like that, and I felt like I was alone out there saying life is easy until I recently stumbled on a very famous person. Confucius said life is really
Okay,
simple, but we insist on making it complicated. I went, okay, I'm not so alone out here that life
exactly.
is easily. But have we, from that perspective, overcomplicated it with social media, our apps, our dings, all going there, beeps and tweets and all these kind of thing that is actually distracting us? Because I noticed from my perspective, a long time ago, I did this. I switched off all my alerts on my technology, so I don't. My phone is always on silent unless there's a specific call, which is rare, that I'm expecting. My phone is on silent, so I don't know, unless I'm looking at my phone, I won't know that it rings because it does light up, but I won't hear it. It doesn't vibrate. Any social media stuff like that, I don't get it. I have to actually go and look for it to know that I've got a message or something like that. Text messages the same on even on my computer, where because how you have an email and it has a number of unread emails on there. I even turned that off, so I don't know if I've got an email, even if I'm looking at it, let alone it beeps. And I found, from my perspective, not having all these distractions coming in, I was able to calm down a little bit. And I
Absolutely.
actually found it uncomfortable now if I'm with friends and their phone rings. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh, shit, what's that? And it literally is like, it's a jolt because I'm not used to it.
Right.
And is it a case where we've overcomplicated things and we just need to, with that mindfulness, or it's not being stoic, but having a little bit of solitude, maybe, if that's the right word, but
Yes,
just having
absolutely.
some peace.
That's it. It's
Mm.
absolutely true. Yeah, we are definitely overstimulated by our
Mm.
technology. There's no question about it. And in fact, I think it's affecting. Study after study comes rolling in about how social media is affecting children. We all know that it can be very detrimental to
Mm.
children and adolescents because of the overstimulation they get from all those different sources, including the technology itself, which is the phones, the computers, the iPads,
Mm.
or the watches. Everything that we've got has got some kind of alert, a beep, a message, something that's coming at us, and it comes at us all the time.
Yeah.
And one of the things, sort of the antithesis of doing that, is getting simpler by, as you put it, turning it off, and
Mm.
then going back inside into yourself
Yeah.
which would be things like doing meditation, taking a walk in nature. Don't
Mm,
worry about carrying your phone with you. Just go out and be alone where you're not distracted, you're not bothered, because we're not alone with ourselves anymore. And because we're
mm,
not alone with ourselves, we're missing the alerts that our body and our brain
mm,
is telling us because we're too busy chasing down, um, phones and other apps that beep and make noise and so forth to try to grab our attention. And I think about that. I think, I look back at Steve Jobs, who is the guy that really put the smartphone together.
mm.
Um, I mean, he's a brilliant guy. He's a visionary, but he's created a monster, right? And it's if you go anywhere in the world, literally anywhere in the world, you're going to see people doing the same thing. They got their heads buried in their phones, right? And it's
Mm.
creating isolation. It's creating all kinds of other things as well. So
Is
I'm
that
not
where we need
against
to?
technology.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that where we need to take that? Because I mean, I love my phone, and I'm sitting here, as you can probably hear in the background. I'm in a cafe by the river. Decided to do this a little bit differently, and just have that get out there and do something. And I think my microphone's pretty good, where it's not, it's a lot louder out here than it's coming through on the microphone, which is really cool. And so I love this technology. And not only that, you're where you're in America. America,
Yeah,
um,
that's very appropriate for the location I'm in the south of the U.S. Yeah.
yeah, so it's kind of, the technology is really good, but do we need to take responsibility and say, hey, because it's not hard. I've got my phone here. I don't know, you can't kind of see it, but yeah, I got my phone. There's a little
Yeah.
button here. You just switch it. That's not a difficult thing. Do we need to be teaching people? Do we need to, hey, as a man, when we're talking about, sensitive men, but even just men generally, taking that, and people, but it's kind of a man show. Um, do we, do we need to be just taking that responsibility and say, hey, I need to take charge here. I need to be able to, and we were talking about before, I'm a sensitive guy. I need to express that. I need to take charge of that. I need to be able to be in touch with my feelings to be able to do that better. I need to shut this off for a little bit. Is that the conversation we need?
That's an interesting idea. You gave me an idea. It would be great. Probably somebody's already done this because it's just create some kind of an app that does that. Just shuts everything off that you don't need that will distract you.
They do it for
You don't have
kids. Yeah, there are apps where it stops the
Yeah, well,
kids from.
you don't even have to touch a button. You just push a button on the app, and it takes care of all that for you. And you can set
But
a
isn't it? Do we
timer
need
on
to
it
have
so that
that? I mean, we've already got the thing. We can just shut it off. Do we need to just go, hey, we need to take responsibility?
well, I guess either way you do it, but a lot of people will forget, and having
Mm,
something that doesn't forget would help. But yeah, I mean, truly, and is having people say, "Look, I can be untethered
yeah,
for 10
that's what I'm
hours."
getting
Right?
at. There's a whole, because I mean, the iPhone has on it already. I don't know about the Google one, but I know iPhone has on it do not disturb mode, and you just tap the button, and it'll even
Well,
calls
yeah,
will
and I
go straight to
use
miss.
that.
Yeah,
I
so it's
use
already
that.
there.
Yeah, I use that. Well, then I guess we should be. Well, I'm just thinking in
It's
terms of
okay to miss the
comprehensive.
call.
But
'Cause
yeah,
I've never lost any business because I've missed a call. No, people go, oh, but I'll miss the call and I'll lose this business. If important people, could you ring up Steve Jobs and get through to him? You couldn't. He's too important.
no, I'm totally with you. If they don't leave a message, it wasn't important.
Yep. But
It
do we need
usually
to?
just
But is that self responsibility? We just need to say, hey, we need that. That we need, again, that sensitivity to go, hey, I need to be paying attention. I'm too busy. I just need to calm down, and one way to calm down is turn the freaking thing off.
exactly. That's a great idea, and we really need to do that. We really do, as a society, need to do
Mm.
that. Multiple societies, as human beings, we need to do that.
Because we
Because I
role
do
model
think,
that. I look at that. Sorry to interrupt, but I was just coming to that with my son. We were going out, and it was with my friends. So boring old people. My 14-year-old son was coming with. He was the only one there, and I noticed
yeah.
as we were walking out, and it's happened a few times since then. His phone was on his desk, and I said, "Do you want to take your phone? It's going to be boring." And he goes, "No, I don't need it." But
There you go.
he's lived with me having my phone on silent for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years now, at least.
Well, look at that. You're modeling it for him. Now he's learning how to do it, and he's going to go out in the world. He's going to show somebody else, and who knows? You may start something here.
Turn your freaking phone off day.
Yeah, but I want to say one thing right now is that I love the fact that you're using sensitivity in the way you're using it. That's the way we should be describing sensitivity, and not it's sort of an apologistic
well, it's awareness, isn't it?
way. It is awareness. That's really, truly all it is, in my opinion, is an awareness. It's a sensory awareness for sure. There's a lot other things that are tacked in with that, like the capacity of taking the sensory ability and processing at a very deep level, and there are other things that are attached to it. But I think more than anything else, if you were to describe sensitivity in a word, it would be awareness. That's what I would use it.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. And to put it in a practical, for the single guys out there that are listening, I know when I was younger, the amount of times I missed out on getting laid because I wasn't sensitive, I wasn't being aware of what was going on, compared to when I was older and went, oh, she's responding this way. Oh, she's interested. Oh, next step. And actually, got there. It's an awareness of what's going on, but it's, use that as a practical example.
Exactly. I was going to say, I think that's a book. In the making.
Hey, let's do a book together.
Okay.
Sensitivity gets you laid.
Well, the title would sell it, I'm sure. But
that's what I think Wayne Dyer did with wasn't it erroneous zones? People thought it said erogenous zones.
Yeah, he did. Yeah,
and they thought they said
the erogenous zones or something like that.
Yeah, people misconstrued it. Yeah,
the erroneous zones is right.
It was erroneous zones. Yeah,
yeah, it was. Been a while. But anyway, that's it. I think we've kind of solved that problem by looking at sensitivity as being awareness.
Yeah.
And if you look at it that way, it doesn't have all the negative connotations to it that seem to be attached because of preconceived notions about what sensitive people are supposed to be like. Really,
well, that's
truly,
because it's one of the 5 pillars that we've got, I think, within what is manly. From you run the What is Manly podcast, and this is part of the Share.care overarching one. But the sensitivity, having the courage to be sensitive is what being a man is about. You have emotions, you need to be able to address them.
Yeah, and I think too, one of the things that a lot of guys think is, well, it's kind of all or nothing thing. If I'm sensitive, I can't be some of these other things that I enjoy being. Or they might want to.
What's an example of that?
Create an image of strength, and they want to protect, and they want to do the things that they want to do with their families, and so forth and so on. They don't realize that it's all part of a balance. You can have those things that are we could consider to be traditional masculine, or the good parts.
Yeah,
and still have the sensitive parts, which are mislabeled often as being feminine characteristics, when in actuality they're human characteristics. And so you should wear them just like you would wear any other human characteristic that you're proud to wear. It's just being a human being. That's it. And that, I think, is that would be a step, maybe of many steps, that would help liberate men to be able to be complete human beings and be able to fulfill so much of their capabilities, because they're allowing it to happen.
Well, I think what you put there too is that balance component. Is that, from my side of things, because there are times where, I might feel emotions, but I know, and I have enough ability to go, okay, this is not the time and place to express that. And take it from the extreme example, if there's a house burning down or something like that, and someone needs to be rescued from inside that, it's not, and you might have that fear or doubt or whatever, that's not the time to be going, oh my God, I can't do this. And it's you need to step up and deal with it, and then later address the emotion associated with that. There's And that's a certain, I think there's a certain training and skill associated with that. And I'm just drawing from my experience, because I know there's times I can shut things off and deal with what I need to deal with, and then later take that time and go, okay, I need to address this. I need to deal with that emotion. I need to experience that, go through that, and maybe talk about it with some friends or get some help or whatever. But in that's that balance. So from what I hear you were talking about, is that something we need to be aware of as well?
Yeah, things like, to use your analogy about the burning house, the fear that you're feeling about going in there for your own life is a natural reaction. You're programmed to survive.
Yeah.
But in this particular case, you're also a human being that has empathy, and you notice that there is a little
Someone
girl
needs help. Yeah.
inside the house, and if you don't go save her, you don't risk that. So the idea is not to suppress even the fear. The fear will give you the sort of the adrenaline that you need to get in there and do what you have to do, if you allow it just to flow through you. But it wouldn't be in such a way that it would inhibit you from taking the action that you need, the courageous part of it. You're fueling it with the adrenaline from the fear. So that's I guess, in a sort of big picture way, it's sort of like, ride the wave of every emotion that comes through if you have to. Just don't let it sink you. Don't let it take you down.
Yeah.
But ride through it and allow it to flow through you. In other words, it's coming into you, and it's originating inside of you for a purpose. And that purpose is to move you, motivate you, get you going one way or another, drawing you close to something or drawing you away from something. But those emotions are important. And so instead of sort of cherry picking them and suppressing the ones you don't feel like dealing with, let them come through. I guess that's the point I'm making. And at some point, yes, you do have to regulate the emotion. You want to channel it, like the fire hose example was.
Yeah.
You can learn to do that as well. But the idea is get comfortable with your emotions, because they really are a part of you and they're never going to go away.
Yeah. I love that. William, it's such a pleasure chatting with you. I think you just summed that up really perfectly there at the end. I was going to ask you for a nutshell, but you just put it in a nutshell. So I think you were sensitive to what I was going to ask.
There you go.
I love it.
There you go.
But always wonderful chatting with you. Thank you for making the time to be on the Share.care podcast and share that experience.
Well, thank you for having me again, Damien. I always enjoy talking with you and love doing your podcast.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.